Hello, everybody. It's Coath with another My Music. It's Friday. Yes, the end of the week. So we're all happy. We're all rushing out to Bandcamp and various other places to spend all of our money. One of the places you want to be spending your money, of course, is the wonderful Analog Trash. And you could join, if you like, their supporters club. All you need to do is watch this, and then we'll tell you how. So there you have it, a myriad of different music there available to you for as little as $4.99 a month, in which case you can download to your heart's content. If you like the physical package, you pay just a little bit more. And you would also get one of these, a lovely Analog Trash supporters card, which enables you to get discounts off of entry tickets to gigs and merchandise as well. What more could you possibly want? Go fill your boots with as much music as possible, because let's face it, musicians need all the help that they can get. And here's one right now on cue, on Analog Trash as well. It's the wonderful Scott from DeathBoy. How are you, sir?
Good, thank you, mate. It's been a hectic week, but we got to the end and nobody's died, so looking all right.
What I really like, I always like people's scenery in the background. You're no exception. You've got a wonderful array of stuff there. But what I particularly like is the way that you've shown that you've got items that don't actually fit in the boxes.
It's an ongoing battle. Over the last year, I let the studio sort of. I went for a rewire that was much needed, and then I got interrupted by life, and it was almost not functional. And it's an unusual thing for me to go for a period of time without a functioning studio, but life was busy. And then I kind of had to grit my teeth and go, we've just signed to Analog Trash. I really need to fix this. So you see things about 50% through an entire rewire. Part of it's neater than it was. A lot of it is not quite fitting in the boxes, as you correctly say. But
you seem like a lot of people that are interested in electronic music to enjoy your gadgets, as it were. Yeah, I mean, that's where it starts, isn't it? It's as much about fiddling with wires as it is about it's about the making of the music. What first got you into sort of electronic music? What were you listening to years ago, which sort of tickled your fancy, as it were?
I think I kind of didn't have much of an option. My dad was a DJ for the vast majority of his life, and that led to him walking in some day when I was like 7 or something, and he'd put the decks out, but not connected the wires. And he came in, and I got everything plugged in, and the wheels turning and the lights on, and I suppose that sort of exposure on a daily basis to technology and his own musical preferences definitely lean into the electronic. And so that was mid-80s-ish, when obviously there's a lot of great electronic music coming out at the time. He was and still is wildly into Gary Newman. Took me to my first Newman gig when I was about 7 as well. So it was surrounded exposure, and it took me a long time to get into non-electronic music, I suppose. And one of my other favourites as a kid was the Pet Shop Boys, and still adore them. Watched them in concert last year. This was in fact the first time I'd ever seen them live, having spent 30 odd years listening to them. And they're also musically they're actually a big influence on the way that I write things, because I learned to play synth playing Pet Shop Boys songs, and their first couple of albums, they had a lot of A minor and D minor in them, and that's mostly white notes, and that was good for a 10-year-old Scott to start to learn stuff. And that stuck with me. But I was moderately allergic to guitars for the first half of my life. When just a bit before I went to uni, I think people were sort of turning me onto grunge, and Nirvana was doing their thing. And I decided that guitars might not be the worst thing in the world. And then at university, I started to go to the goth gigs, alternative gigs, as well as going to drum and bass gigs. But definitely that kind of music sort of slid under my radar. And around that time as well, I mean, the Proj were doing Great Guns, and they're a huge influence on what we do. 9 Inch Nails were doing Great Guns, and
I was going to say, yeah,
enormous. But also an absolutely iconic item in my past was the Spawn album soundtrack, with the fantastic combinations of artists that you'd never imagine you get on the same CD, one-on-one with each other. Just some fantastic sort of pair-ups. And they balance both the dirgy guitar music with fantastic electronic and samples and breakbeats. And torn apart from that album, Josh Winkin, Stabbing Westwards, was the track that made me go, I need to make this kind of music. And that was the light bulb moment of,
that was the catalyst.
New thing, actually, yeah. And I was writing music before that, but it was almost exclusively rave music, because I rave in sort of 90 through 94, before it sort of petered out, was very much when I was in my 13 through 17, 18 sort of stage. So that was what I liked then, and I wrote a load on my old Commodore Amiga, as it goes. And then sort of got stolen away by the industrial fairies.
Well, you mentioned earlier, you said that the Pet Shop Boys in a way influenced the way that you wrote music as well. Where's your starting point typically? I mean, do you typically sort of start with a drum pattern? Do you typically start with a chord pattern?
It's an interesting one. It very much varies. I 99% of the time it is a sit down and see what comes out, rather than sit down with a plan. Very occasionally, I can probably think of about 3 times I've been sat on the train on the commute home, back when that was a thing, before the event, and I'd have it all lined up and was desperately trying to not forget the bloody ideas and rolling it over in my brain until I got to the sequencer and bosh it out as soon as I could. But most times I will sit down and I'll dial up 1 or 2 of my favourite plugins, and that might be analog sounding bass synth. I like writing synth bass. It might be I've bought a new synth and I'm definitely going to have a crack on it today, so I switch it on and I start noodling in that. But I absolutely love drum programming, particularly breakbeat programming. So also sometimes I sit down and go, I've got this pattern in my head, or that breakbeat, I haven't used that in a bit and it's nice and chunky and I've put it through this effect. That now, and that says to me what needs to come next. Whatever the first thing is, once it's not a blank sheet, for me, my brain suggests the next thing layer by layer. Each thing sort of inspires the next one that comes down. And then when you've got a stack of them, you can start to broaden it out. That's kind of the process.
But you do work with vocals as well. And the thing is that whenever an electronic artist sort of veers away from it being purely kind of instrumental and you start to work with vocals, same actually for kind of any genre of music in a way, once you get a vocalist in there, do you then actually work back the other way? Do you once you got structure and then the vocals start to go into that, and I presume they're quite often fairly late on, you've got most of a track and then the vocals, but do you then find once the vocals come in, you then start to play around with what's already there, because the vocals have kind of determined that, well, that actually doesn't sound right there anymore. So
I think that's pretty accurate. Again, very rare occurrence, I might actually have the vocals in my head and I would slap down like just a metronomic beat, maybe sort of stick some chords, some pads, or a bass line under it, sing a test version of, it might just be a chorus, because sometimes the whole vocal part hasn't really blossomed, but you've got a really catchy 2 bars worth. And as you rightly say, and it definitely, that is a good description, that once I have sat down at least a few verse choruses then I start to revisit what's under it, because actually the narrative suggests that there might be a natural pause here. If there's a narrative, sometimes I'm just shouting abuse at the stars. But sometimes there's a story in there, and there's actually, it goes like, oh, there should be a bit of a breakdown or a quiet bit because it's all touchy-feely, and then it's going to get shouty again. I am relatively verse chorus, so I'm not one of your elaborate structuralists, I suppose. And also because I come from a loop-based background in terms of like rave music and drum and bass, etc. Sometimes I don't have choruses. It's just there's like 3 slightly longer verses, and the underpinning sort of melody and chord structure doesn't necessarily change, because it's more of a dance sensibility than a
it's a groove in a way, isn't it? It's almost something that just carries throughout, and it just comes in and repeats itself in a different way, and then back out again, etc. Now, you've got a partner in crime in all of this. How did you kind of meet, and what does he bring to the equation as well?
He is both a beautiful human being and the longest. He's a musician that has managed to not run away from me for the longest period of time.
Well, there you go.
So this is Adam, who is originally the bass player, and there's a mild bit of story about that. The original incarnation of DeathBoy as a live act came when we were on Was Factory Records, and with something like 2 weeks to spare, the guys that ran the label contacted us and said, "Did you ever get round to making that live band?" And I went, "No, we had a few meetups and played with some things, but not in earnest." And so they said, "Well, we've had a slot drop out at a gig upstairs at the garage, and we'd very much like you to do it. Do you reckon you can pull it off?" So we went from the few sort of initial meetings where we chucked a few ideas about to, we've got to make this happen. And we got 2 weeks. I think I took one of those weeks off work to just focus on it, and we got everybody around the house as often as possible. Adam delightfully was brought with a friend of mine, and she was the person that I was assuming was going to be our bass player. She rocks up having brought Adam with her, and basically goes, "Oh, I don't know if I'm so into this after all." And Adam goes, "Well, I'd like to do it." So she basically brought her own replacement, which is very kind of her.
That's an interesting way of going about it.
And we gelled, and at the time we had 2 guitarists, a drummer. I think that was the original configuration, and Adam. The band has grown and shrunk, and mostly shrunk over the years as we've got older, and life and family and jobs and everything have kind of intervened. Adam stuck with me, bless him. We were musically, when we sit down, it's one of those situations where I don't have to say too much. We do have quite disparate influences, but if I lay something down, he'll just go, "I think I've got this." And then what he plays is what was in my mind. And I haven't said to him, "Attack it this way." We're just quite simple, which is it's a nice thing.
For people that haven't yet listened to your music, obviously the whole purpose of these conversations is that people get to know the interesting people behind the music, and then go and investigate the music for itself. But for anybody that hasn't yet heard DeathBoy, how would you describe your music?
The more common tracks from the history, because we've been going a while, and I tend to write 1 to 2 albums worth of material per year, and I have done for the last 10 or so years. So there's a lot out there. The greater part of the body of work, if that's a term that applies to our rubbish, would be, or at least we aim for, somewhere that is between 9 Inch Nails and The Prodigy. Whether we hit the mark with that varies according to the day, the waxing and waning of caribou populations, and how much vodka I've had. Sometimes we do sound exactly like that. Sometimes something comes out that's very different. The two existing commercial albums that we have are definitely in that vein. But of the other stuff that I write, it varies from at one end, drone music with just the kind of thing that you might like to listen to get a sleep to, because I actually literally do that, through to I used to like 90s gabba, so there's some very ferocious sort of almost breakcore level complex, fast, energetic beats. And I also, like I say, I come from a club background, so some things are kind of unabashed trance tracks. There's a gamut, but what we tend to move around is breakbeats with nice fat bass lines. I've also a huge love of my life is trip hop. We were even lucky enough to support Tricky way back.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, that was an experience. And I think as I've become older and less furious, then the tendency has been towards industrial trip hop, if you will. So a slightly slower tempo, still some ferocity, but we're not trying to smash your ears in with every track, or scream the world into a better shape. Slightly. I'd hesitate to use the word mature, but possibly slightly more mature as I'm now in my 40s, and DeathBoy is a considerably worse moniker than it was when I was a teenager.
Well, the stuff that I've heard so far that you're releasing on Analog Trash, I mean, that to me, there's some pop elements to it, there's some pop sensibility to it, but it's so certainly sonically challenging to some extent, which I think is in a nice way, because actually there's elements to it where the listener will need to actually let go of certain pop sensibilities and go, well, actually I need to, I'm going to need to listen to this 2 or 3 times. I mean, would you say that's fair enough? I mean, you're trying to make the listener, you're challenging the listener, I think, in terms of what they might be used to sound wise.
We definitely, I don't steer towards a template that would be, there's a number of sort of pop templates, for instance, and I've tried my hand at doing that on purpose, and it just makes me feel icky. So if I write something with a poppy vibe, it might not have been deliberate, but they sometimes exist. But I definitely don't sort of feel as though I need to stick to an expectation, because it is it's still, after all these years, all about self-expression rather than writing to the audience, I think, or writing to an audience. I think that the time when we most attempted to write to an audience was within the first sort of 4 or 5 years of DeathBoy as a live concern, and we knew that when people went to a gig, the kind of thing that they'd like to listen to. And I think that our second album, End of an Era, was like the zenith of that. But at the same time, what I was writing at home was not to an or the audience, and I realised that we needed to shook off the expectation that basically don't give a toss about what people are expecting, and write the thing that comes out of your fingers and your vocal cords. It is much more what feels right than what we think people would be expecting from us.
Yeah. So that if people are listening, don't expect Coldplay type vocals on any of this, because you're not. That's not your style, is it, Scott? So, I mean, in terms of the vocals, do you feel like you're trying to push on your vocals now as well?
I'm not trying to get better. I am not. I was described charitably at the time by one of the guys from Wasp Factory as a man who can't sing but needs to sing, which was pretty bloody accurate, to be honest. And I think that where my voice is these days is the result of having actually sung on stuff for best part of a few decades, and I've got better in it. It's my primary instrument is to rob from Brian Eno is the studio. The next might be the synth, because I grew up playing piano and playing on synthesizers. Vocals a distant third, and guitar an even more distant fourth. And I also very much enjoy collaborating with actually talented vocalists, because I can absolutely support them with a decent melody. It's a weird and pleasant surprise when somebody actually does say, "Scott, could you sing for us?" Because that isn't where I see my direct strength. I think I'm more authenticity than I am note hitting.
Yeah, well, but there's something in that though, isn't there? I can't remember what Tracy Thorn calls them in her book. There's
I've got to read that book. Tracy.
Yeah, one of the books that she's written is all about singers and the act of singing itself, and whether she calls them sort of anti-singers or something like that. She very unkindly or kindly, depends which way you look at it, puts people like Christian Hirsch in there, who actually I think's got a tremendous voice because it's full of life, and that's the thing, isn't it? I think there's a lot of people that are never going to win X Factor, thank God, or any of these TV talent shows because they can't do the acrobatics and hit a million notes in a million miles an hour, but ultimately their voice can tell a story, and has personality to it, and you've only got to look at people like Robert Smith. I mean, he's never going to win. He's never going to win a singing competition. But ultimately, I could listen to him sing the telephone directory any day of the week.
Absolutely.
So I think it's fine. I think it's good to I think it's good to have that variety, and I think it challenges it challenges the listener sometimes as well, that we're so used to saccharine, really over the top, auto-tuned voices that are so damn perfect these days that it's really nice when we actually hear a voice that is well traveled, should we say that? That's it. Well lived in.
I'm going to keep that one. It's a funny one actually, because I have been a software dev for much of my life. So I'm a very technical music maker. Used to create stuff back on the Atari ST back in the crikey, when that would have been late 80s, I suppose. It wasn't very good, but I was using it. And so I understand and do use tools like Auto-Tune and Melodyne. But I'm very much of the lightest touch is the best touch for those things. If the person listening can't tell that there's been a little tickling of Auto-Tune and maybe it rescued 3 notes that I didn't quite nail, then that's how I think it should be used. There's one note at the start of one of my favourite tracks of mine where I can bloody hear that I did tune the buggery out of it, and I hear it every single time and regret it because it went to CD. It didn't quite make me remove it or re-sing it, and every time I open with that sound, I'm like, ugh, that was an obvious one. And I can accept the aesthetic as well when somebody cranks those tools up to maximum. I like it in hip hop tracks where you've got and it's not auto-tune, right? It's the names escape me, but it's a similar thing, and you're singing the melody, but the synth formant is actually
it's like modulation, basically.
Yeah, exactly right. And that as an aesthetic is perfectly fine. It's when you know that the person that's standing there and opening their mouth isn't really emitting those tones whatsoever, but wants to convey that they are. They want you to think that they are bloody amazing. And then if you heard the side desk recording, you go, oh, God, they can't sing a bloody note, can they? The dishonesty of that pisses me off. So I'd rather be on the honest and less adulterated side. The options are there. Vocoder was what I was trying to think of. And I'm going to be doing some work this evening, and I've got a line in my head, and I'm like, oh, I might break out the old vocoder. Well, that isn't to make me sound like I'm on point with the note. That's to make me sound robotic,
like an instrument. Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly that. That's absolutely fine. When you start to use a vocal maybe more as an instrument, or as a part of a melody line that's an instrument within the track, as opposed to a vocal. A normal vocal melody. I think that's absolutely fine. And I'm all for sort of playing with vocals all over the place, but I think it's nice to have kind of a genuine voice in there sometimes as well. That's just rough for what it is. That's absolutely fine.
It doesn't make people dislike punk or dislike a band like Nirvana when Cobain's voice wasn't necessarily up to scratch all the time, but it definitely grabbed you by the throat and shook you around a bit and delivered a message. It connected with you in a very human way, and so what if there were bum notes in there? It really doesn't matter to me at all.
I'm going to leave you on that, actually. How important is the message to you still? I mean, you know, I feel from reading sort of material about you, you know, I've only just met you, but that it's really important, the kind of message element of the song, getting some kind of, you know, agenda out there into the world.
I hope that it has meaning to the people that listen to it. But I am very keen that to not sort of, if anybody said like, your song that you wrote, I love it because it means this, and I knew that it didn't mean that, I would be very happy to not disabuse them of whatever it was that grabbed them about that. And I think that the height for me, which I don't know how often I achieve it, but I've been lucky enough to have some people tell me that a track of mine connected this way, is if somebody says that you articulated something that they couldn't articulate. So it resonates and they knew that message, but they couldn't have got it out of their mouth if they tried. And by listening to it, that resolves it for them and they can go, that's what I was trying to bloody say. And that kind of moment, that typifies the musicians whose work I adore and have made the greatest sort of world-shaking moments for me. And if I can write the odd track like that, then job's a good one.
Do you know what? I totally agree with that. I mean, that's fundamentally what I do in my day job, day in, day out as well. I take clients on a journey in terms of their story and help them get their story out there, because it's, you know, everybody's got a wonderful story. Yep. You know, in a way, you know, there's hundreds of millions of you out there who are rock stars. You're just not making rock music. You know, and that's the important thing, that everybody's got really, anybody that's making a difference in the world or doing something, you've all got great stories, but sometimes people really struggle to articulate that story or get that thing out there. So I think it's a great position to be in if you're helping in some way, shape or form to articulate what others are struggling to articulate. I think that is a wonderful privilege to be in life. So yeah, I totally agree with you, Scott. It's been a pleasure. You know, I must come around there sometime and play on all of those synths. That looks like hours and hours of fun.
Welcome, Macy. Yep. There's a small amount of space, but it'll fit too. So yeah.
Can we get another one in?
Nice. Yeah. I've got one of those in red.
we can always squeeze another one in, can't we?
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you today. Now, if people want to get hold of DeathBoy music, they've now just signed to the wonderful over there, Analog Trash. So that, you know, go to analogtrash.com. You will find a whole page designated to DeathBoy, and you can listen to some of the music there, and then you can go and purchase it for real money, or you can sign up. real money.
Just listening is fine, but money's lovely because there's more synths to buy.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Or you can sign up, do the whole subscription thing. In which case, you won't just get DeathBoy music; you'll get lots of other people's music as well. But you know, everybody gets.
I think their supporter deal's excellent. Yep.
Yeah, everybody gets a little taste of the pie then in that as well. So I think that's a wonderful thing to do. If not, do you have your own website as well or not?
Yep, deathboy.co.uk should kick you off to all of our stuff. We've got a Bandcamp, deathboy.bandcamp.com, and soundcloud.com/deathboy. And there's a great amount of free stuff. There's a lot of pay what you want, and we've got our previous commercial albums on there as well. So fill your boots.
Yeah, fill your boots is absolutely right. That's it, folks, for another My Music. Remember, it is Bandcamp Friday. So, I mean, today's the day. Go, fill your boots. Buy as much music as you possibly could listen to for the whole of the weekend. Annoy all of your other people in the family who are just putting on Taylor Swift on repeat, and play something decent. And that will be great. And then you can come back and blame me. Because I don't care. And the rest of your family won't find me. I'll be hiding on a different planet. But until next time, thanks, Scott, for coming and joining me today. This has been My Music. Keep listening to some new music out there, folks, because quite frankly, there's some brilliant stuff being produced still. And, you know, anyone that says music's dead, you're wrong. It's you that's dead.
Yeah.
Bye for now.